At this time, we'll call to order the Board of County Commissioners meeting for a committee of the whole meeting. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Fast,
Aye.
Commissioner Myers,
Myers, aye.
Commissioner O'Hara. Here. Commissioner Hanslick,
Hanslick here.
Commissioner Ashcraft,
Here.
Commissioner Allenbrand,
Allenbrand, aye.
and Chairman Eilert.
Here, all are present. We do have a quorum. Robin or Scott? The purpose of our meeting today is to review the revisit list, or is that correct?
Yes, we actually, Maury is going to present PowerPoint on the American Recovery Plan Act. And then we are going to go through just a few revenue changes, and then we'll finish with the revisit list.
There is an action item today that we need to make a recommendation to the full council for next week regarding the budget. Is that right?
Yes, there won't be an actual amount. Once we finalize today or tomorrow, then we'll go back and we'll come to that final number. But it's really just saying everything in the proposed is what you want included in that maximum. And then if there are any other changes, either from Maury's presentation or from the revisit list.
Okay, well, don't let us forget to take the appropriate action. Thank you.
And one thing I would add is that part of Maury's presentation includes elements that tie to the revisit list. So that's why we went with this order. And so I'll let him cover that. But a couple of things on the revisit list are in Maury's plan. And so we thought that it was better to do that first. And the revisit list is fairly short this year. So that
Very
also
good.
helps.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
So good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. Maury Thompson, Deputy County Manager, here to discuss what I would term a framework for the county's consideration and use of our state and local fiscal recovery funds, which were part of the larger American Recovery Plan Act. And again, I want to stress that this is a framework, not asking for specific direction or action from the board today. Would, however, be interested in any impressions or thoughts about the framework I'm laying out. Furthermore, I would suggest that as specific components of this framework are further developed and ready for action, those will be brought back before this body for action at that appropriate time. So with that, Robin's going to help me drive through this. Just as a reminder, the state and local fiscal recovery fund in total in the United States was $65.1 billion of direct flexible aid for every county in the country. And again, you need to keep that in context. That's one component of the American Recovery Plan Act. Johnson County, I believe, as you know, received an allocation of $117,009,332. And I will report, as of last week, we received our second tranche, as they referred to these funds, of a bit more than $59 million. So we are now in possession of all $117 million of this aid. Next slide talks about the allowable uses of recovery funds per Treasury guidance. And we'll say thanks to our affiliation with the National Association of Counties. They have been a great aid and support, helping counties, including us throughout the country, work through the use of these funds. This is a slide that I took from their website, which really lays out the 6 broad categories of allowable uses of these funds. Support public health response, replace public sector revenue loss, and I'll talk specifically about that one as we go through the presentation. Water and sewer infrastructure, addressing negative economic impacts, again, a very broad category of allowable uses. Premium pay for essential workers, and broadband infrastructure. I would pause here to say, particularly on that broadband infrastructure, again, I'm going to reiterate again, this is part of the larger act. The American Recovery Plan Act has many different facets of it. Some of those are specific to some of these issues. So there are other pots of money, if you will, for water and sewer infrastructure and broadband that we may be able to tap into outside these direct funds to Johnson County. We recently, and I think it was about 2 weeks ago, received a letter from Treasury. It was sent to the chairman. He forwarded it to me, and I pulled some language from that letter. it was, again, a little bit of further guidance as we've gotten further into the uses of these funds around the country. And you can see on that slide there that they were really stressing three primary uses for counties to consider as they made decisions around these funds: expanding the workforce, housing, and keeping our families and communities safe. And I will say that one is fairly broad, but three suggestions, recommendations that counties ought to be looking at and towards their use of these dollars. So again, I just commented a minute ago that we'd come back to talk about replacing public sector revenue loss. The act itself and Treasury have laid out a calculation for units of government to use based on your most current year financial audited figures. We have now used that formula for 2020 and 2021 and have been able to calculate our public sector revenue loss. And I'll get to that amount here in a moment. I thought it important to provide this information for you here. Generally, these funds, public sector revenue loss, is a very broad category, allowing local governments to use funds in the most flexible manner possible. So in following not only the National Association of Counties, but the GFAO advice and others, really looking around the country, the recommendation is, to the greatest extent possible, you ought to look at utilizing this calculation to pull down, if you will, those funds, because then that gives policymakers like you all the greatest amount of flexibility in determining how you want to use those funds. And you can see this slide points out some examples, but those are only examples. And finally, the bullet at the bottom says it is more flexible and can be used for a broad range of government services. And some language that I read just today indicated that kind of the rule of thumb, if you will, is any service that local government has or could provide is, again, an allowable use of those funds. So very flexible in their use. Next slide, however, talks about what are the ways that you can't use them. So there are some prohibitions about what you can do with them. I would suggest it's a fairly short list, but some things that we have to avoid. So let's talk then about what I'm proposing for the Johnson County Plan or the Johnson County Framework. Lost revenue, again, using that calculation, using our 2020 and 2021, audited financials, our calculation is we can claim lost revenue of about $85.5 million. So again, recommendation is that we do so. That leaves $31 million that I'm talking about direct community investments, again, totaling our $117 million. So first I wanted to go to those one-time, that I'm calling them one-time community investments, that $31 million that would continue to have its identity as local fiscal recovery funds. So this $31 million would be subject to all of the rules, the regulations about use, reporting, et cetera, of the local fiscal recovery funds. When you look at this slide, you've got the total at the top, then that public health $5 million. I want to pause here and remind the board of some action that you took, I don't know, probably close to 2 months ago. We came before you with an agenda item to recognize $22 million from 2020 in lost revenue using our 2020 audited financials. And you approved that. We moved those into the countywide support fund. That's what we were calling it. It's really a subset of general fund reserves, but we put the fence around it, if you will, for accountability and for tracking and for public reporting so that there was full transparency about the use of those funds, that they didn't get lost, if you will, in the bigger general fund reserve. At that same time, you recognize the 22 and lost revenue. You also agreed to set aside $5 million for public health expenses over the next few years due to effects of the pandemic. So I wanted to point out that we've already, out of this 31, really designated $5 million at this point for public health expenses. So then working left to right across the page and starting with expanding the workforce, small business assistance, again, back to one of those categories that Treasury recommends that we look at, have three proposals today. The first is a collaborative partnership with the University of Kansas, actually the Edwards campus, Johnson County Community College and Workforce Partnership. They are proposing a comprehensive workforce effort of about $3.5 million. I will point out, because I know some of you have been contacted by one or two disability providers wanting to know about workforce. This would be a component of that work. So if anyone's looking for that and doesn't see it, that's where that would fall. Secondly, that's the Arts Council of Johnson County, $3.5 million, really replicating some work they did for us last time with our coronavirus relief funds. And that is really intended to be a subset of small business assistance, really around the creative sector. And I'd encourage us all, when I say creative sector, to think very broadly, because that is the intent. I think as we know, when you look at small business impact, the creative arts sector, and when I say event venues, situations like that, those were one of the hardest hit entities. And they really sustained some continuing and ongoing detriment because of the closures during the pandemic. And then finally, the Enterprise Center in Johnson County, $5 million for a small business assistance program. We'll share that. I was in further conversation with Jeff Shackelford yesterday, and he has some different ideas, slightly different from what we did last year, maybe to create a fund, and we'll have to vet that out, whether this is allowable or not, but really to create a fund that could be used as a revolving fund. I think Commissioner Ashcraft, you maybe raised this issue with Mr. Shackelford, his budget presentation. How can we create returns using angel investors as an example, some of those returns back into the system to create ongoing benefit to our small business and entrepreneurs here in the county. So he's thinking through that. So continue to have conversations with him about that. Before I go any further, I want to pause and provide one additional caveat. Again, this is a framework. These aren't fully vetted at this point and reviewed proposals and ready to go. These are recommendations that we want to look at. Again, would hope to get some direction here, sense of this seems to make sense. Then we will continue to work with these entities to fully vet out and create programs that meet the requirements. Part of that will be reviewed by our internal staff as well as our consultant, Whit O'Brien, to make sure that they're fully in compliance. Let's move to housing. You see, let me back up. Workforce, you'll see $12 million proposed there. Housing, almost $11 million proposed there for a number of different items. I'm going to skip over A for a moment and go to B, utility assistance. That would be additional money into our utility assistance fund to support individuals needing that assistance in our community. Cold weather response, and I believe we heard something about this in public comments this morning about those really at capacity when our cold weather shelter project 1020 is at capacity. There's no place for folks to go. Received a proposal. This would create some funding for other options for people once they were at capacity. Item D, then, speaking of Project 1020, some of you may be aware that they moved locations a couple of years ago and are needing to make some modifications to continue to operate where they are, and this would be in response to that. Next item is also related. HMIS is the Homeless Management Information System. As you recall, Johnson County is part of the continuum of care here in Johnson County. There is a need to replace their management system, and this would be the funds for that. Next item, energy efficiency and septic program, and there's probably quite a bit contained in this item. This is meant to provide funds to do energy audits of individuals' homes. I see this as a potential response, and not solely, but able to address the issue that we've talked about elderly being able to remain in their home and being priced out or unable to stay. If we can provide some assistance through energy audits and then some funds to make necessary repairs, You know, we have that program now within county government, but limited funds and limited ability to address the need. So we would do some of that here. And then the septic program thought is whether that could be included here. And again, would need to continue to work with Susan and staff about that as well. So a lot potentially contained in that item. And then item G is the Unhoused Solutions Fund. Again, we heard from the public speaker this morning about that ongoing need in Johnson County. I would suggest that there's continues to be lots of work that would need to be done, lots of study, lots of assurances, providers. So again, can't stress enough, lots of work. This would be, again, the notion of earmarking some of those funds once and if those solutions are identified and they make sense, that we would have some funds to assist, which relates back to the item that I skipped, that study, and that's probably not a good descriptor. Part of the concern that I've heard around this topic is making sure that whoever's engaged in this work has a sound business plan that has been fully vetted. They have addressed all ongoing operational costs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some, it's not some work, a lot of work, quite frankly, that would need to be done there. And it would be some funds to assist getting a professional entity in to help them create that business plan. And then finally, item 3, that category of keeping our families and communities safe. Quite frankly, just a list of a number of things here. First, the Regional Homeland Security Coordinating Committee, talking about keeping our communities safe. Johnson County is part of the RHSCC. Again, working on Homeland Security issues here in the regional area and in Johnson County. Some need for improved technology to support that effort, and this would be Johnson County's contribution there. Second item is my RC, our Resource Connection Mobile.
I'm sorry, would you say RH?
RHSCC, Regional Homeland Security Coordinating Committee.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
No, thank you. Second item is my Resource Connection, or my RC Mobile. You've heard staff talk about that, quite frankly, innovative work we did a number of years ago to kind of link all of our health and human services providers together through innovative work that our own staff did to create that platform. It also has a public facing side to it. It was never meant to be mobile friendly. Our case managers don't have an easy way in the field to access all of the great resources we created. Excuse me. So this would be providing a mobile version of that so our staff could access that, as well as the community, from a mobile device. The next item, Midwest Wellness. This is a partner with Johnson County Mental Health Center. I believe it was last legislative session. There was some work done in the Kansas legislature to prove an expansion of what we call the clubhouse model, formerly provided in Sedgwick County, but never here in Johnson County. Midwest Wellness is the entity hosting that effort, and they are in need of some funds to help renovate that site to provide, excuse me, those services. Next item is MOXA, that's the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. Again, keeping our families and communities safe. They are asking for additional funds to help support their work here in Johnson County. Again, let me pause there to remind you all that that is one of the requirements, that these funds be used in Johnson County. So when I say in Johnson County, there's a reason for stressing that. Any uses of these funds that would extend beyond Johnson County, we have to be able to show that those funds went for the benefit of residents of Johnson County. Next item is food pantry support, $810,000. I would suggest that this was one of our most successful and well-received uses of our coronavirus relief funds last time, and this would be replicating that program of one-time support to every identified food pantry in Johnson County. Excuse me. And I believe, if I recall correctly, that was $16,000 per pantry that we provided. Item F, child care licensing fees. My understanding that the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, using their federal funds, has waived fees for child care licensing, I believe, for this year and next. However, their money does not waive the local portion of those fees, and this would be our contribution to fully waive fees for child care licensing, which is a nice segue into the last item on this list. Again, you'll see ECJC. Excuse me. And $2 million for a childcare business program. So part of the issue that I've observed over the last few years has been workforce, housing, and childcare have been the three primary components. Childcare I've embedded in this category of keeping our families and communities safe. But I will share one of the struggles for me in figuring out how to address childcare is, unlike last time when we did this, we provided childcare and that went for fees. And that was a great relief at the time, but it really didn't address the ongoing need for childcare. And quite frankly, I'm struggling to come up with good solutions for that. I'm proposing that these two items, thank you, Colin. Thank you, get towards that goal. So some money to waive fees, and then in conversations with Jeff Shackelford, my understanding is ECJC formerly had this childcare business program and thought it was successful, but they had to end it due to lack of funding a couple of years ago, if I recall correctly. But what these funds do, it actually takes individuals who want to get into the business and want to go about it, I'd say correctly, to understand all the ramifications, help them develop a business plan. It helps support them in, and again, covering their fees to get it into the business and establish. So I think it's one way to get at the capacity and start to trying to do something to increase the number of licensed childcare providers in the community. So that's the proposal at current time for the direct community investment, and be happy to pause for questions there, or we can keep moving.
Mr. Thompson, let me ask you, I mean, these are one-time monies, so we need to keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
And if we invest and create an ongoing program with these monies, then there's a higher ticket price down the road. And how much time do we have to expend these funds? I thought there was a longer period of time than the CARES Act.
Well, generally through the end of next year. There are some exceptions to that. And generally speaking, they're a little more flexible than the CRF funds were about a hard end date to make sure that they were not only appropriated, but actually proof that they were expended based on your particular use. There is a little bit more flexibility here,
Okay.
but generally end of next year.
All right. Again, keep in mind, these are general ideas and
Correct.
we're not being asked to take any official
Correct.
action. But are there questions? Ms. O'Hara?
So on workforce, having a small business,
Mhm.
the issue is there's just no people. The unemployment rate, what is that? 1.4% or less? And there's just, when you have an opening, as all of the county departments realize. So it's like, we just really can't create more people to come in and take these jobs. So I'm not sure how these programs are going to be utilized to help address the workforce issue, because it really is that there's no one. It's very, very difficult. And
Mhm.
and we have no idea with the inflation rate soaring and interest rates going up. And obviously there's a great probability of a recession, and a recession is going to mean that there will be more people available for existing jobs because there are going to be companies that are downsizing. So it's like the natural ebb and flow of our economy may be addressing some of these issues and giving the money to these groups. The Arts Council, I mean, I'm a musician, I write poetry. I mean, so my son is a musician, my son-in-law, I mean, we're a family of musicians. And I have friends that actually attempt to make a living as musicians, and it is tough, but I'm not sure giving $3.5 million to the Art Council is the answer. So I think as we move forward, we have to be extremely judicious. And then back to the childcare, again, it's, there's no one to hire in these care facilities. It's a staffing issue. It's so absolutely, I'm all about small businesses because that's where I come from. But I just don't know if it's if government is the answer. Too often I see government overpromise and underdeliver. And I don't want us to do that. And then the other thing I don't want to do is these one-time expenditures suddenly become requirements that we continue to fund these programs. That is extremely concerning. And I know that staff understands that I would like to develop a plan and maybe the 85 million that we could use to pay for some of our expenses and then use the excess money to pay down maybe on the courthouse so that we could actually reduce the sales tax by 1/4%. Yeah, I'm just very concerned about quote unquote one-time expenditures and then suddenly they become embedded in the budget. So those are my comments.
So if I may, a couple responses. When I start out where you did, Commissioner, about lack of employees. You're absolutely right. Jeff and I had that conversation. And don't have any illusions, we're going to just create additional people. However, to the Child Care Business Program, I personally think that is one place where maybe we can create more employees. If you've followed what's happened with the loss of workers in the workforce, part of the issue is people just choosing to exit the workforce. Maybe there are folks who we could incent to get into the childcare provision business who literally aren't working right now. So I think there is a possibility to do some of that with that particular issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is, even though I've got people listed here, I want to be clear, we're not giving those people money. They are administrating programs on our behalf.
Well, I understand that, but then there's an expectation that they get more money the next year.
And I don't know that I would agree with that. We have a history of our last use of CRF funds. Those, again, like these are one-time funds. We've demonstrated the funds are gone. It's done.
Okay, thank you.
I recall there is a restriction on using these monies to reduce existing debt.
We have to be
Is that
very
right?
careful about that. Yes.
Yes.
Right. Okay, thank you. Other questions, Ms. Allenbrand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a positive note, some of these allocations that you're looking at, they actually train people that don't have the qualifications to do the job. And that is one of the biggest problems.
Correct.
People are not like of degree, like of being able to become a welder, or let's say it's a trade. And so Johnson County Workforce is one. They actually literally do testing to help people find a different location or a different occupation to get into. That's money well spent. It's one-time use. You're providing education and training. And one of their biggest problems is daycare and lack of gas, just getting to the job, but provide training and providing that for the workforce, to me, is money well spent. And being a long time ago licensed state daycare provider, it is expensive when you don't have the money and you're trying to get into get your license and what you do within your home and follow those guidelines. There's an expense to that. And then being able to go through and find out what all the regulations are and how to put that into place. So I'm supportive of looking at these. And again, we know they're only one-time use, and we're trying to set up some different groups for positive outcomes.
Again, I would remind everyone, these are broad categories, and there will be time for additional specific review as we go forward. Other questions, Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A process question first, Mr. Thompson. As you, and I know you put a lot of time and energy, and I thank you for that. You always do a good, thoughtful presentation. But my question was, the process that you went through to get us to this point, did that include any outreach with our other governmental partners in terms of monies they had and how we might coordinate our efforts into whatever broad categories or pictures, and how is that represented here?
So thank you for that question. I truly appreciate it because there have been lots of those conversations. And I would point out that our cities have been very dogged in their queries of me personally about our plans for the use of these dollars, because they were wanting to do just as you suggested, find ways. You'll see one particular item coming up here shortly. My understanding in most recent conversations, most of them are likely using the revenue loss calculation. So it kind of changed after they made those decisions. Again, like I'm recommending we do, it kind of changed the flavor of some of those conversations. Again, they had much greater flexibility as to what they were going to do for those funds. So the need or desire to find those areas, quite frankly, did diminish some. However, those conversations are ongoing. I've pointed out there's a number of things that I've proposed here that I think there are those opportunities to partner together. The utility assistance, some of the home modifications, particularly cities in the Northeast who expend funds to do those things. I think there are opportunities joined together. And again, on some of the workforce programs, if they're interested, I think those opportunities are there too.
Follow on, Mr. Chairman. So within the confines of the three categories, as you've expressed, trying to respect the federal gods from on high and what they've outlined, what is it that we're trying to accomplish for Johnson County government, but the broader Johnson County community, including the cities? What are we trying to accomplish? Because I look at this and it comes across as rather piecemeal. They're good things, but I'm trying to understand. So what will be the outcome? How will Johnson County be better 5 years from now?
So if I can start with the federal response to that, and you may have heard me say this before, unlike the last set of funds, those were called relief funds. Those were meant to be immediate relief to the financial issues caused by the pandemic. These are called recovery funds. And the federal premise is these are investments to put communities in a better footing going forward. They're meant to be less just one-time fixes, but again, establishing more infrastructure, doing things that local units of government have struggled to, quite frankly, come up with the resources to address, to put you on a better path going forward. So that's the intent. I think, quite frankly, when I get to the next part of this, the allocation of the 85, that quite frankly probably gets more to those longer term investments.
Okay, last question, Mr. Chairman. Then, well, what I don't see, and it in part goes to what Commissioner Hare raised, is there a component that recognizes some attempt to offer tax relief, either directly or indirectly, to the citizens of Johnson County? I understand that it's complicated and you can't pay off debt, but using these funds as offsets for even short-term or hopefully long-term costs. Is that here?
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay, ask that question again.
So-
Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Chair. Just for some feedback, Mr. Thompson, I really like the way you've laid this out. It's a lot of food for thought. As far as a goal, I think it's exactly what it says. It's looking at community investment. And I think that's important, and it's what the money needs and has to be used for. So I like those types of things. With Commissioner Allenbrand, I agree a lot with everything you said about workforce. Workforce to me, sometimes it may be difficult to find workforce, but sometimes you don't just give up. You have to continue looking at, and I think sometimes it's the targeting of workforce, the education of the workforce, which is what Ms. Allenbrand was kind of alluding to. And I think those are types of ways that you approach it to try to gain some of that benefit, that community investment of, because again, I think a lot of our workforce in a lot of situations just isn't educated on what is out there, what is available, what types of programs can I get into that may help me as an individual really raise the bar for what I'm doing and what my future might be. So anyway, the overall aspect of what you're presenting, I really like it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fast, did you have a question?
Yeah, the study for 60,000, I missed that. What kind of study?
That's really developing a business plan and helping the issue around our unhoused or homeless in the community. You heard me make the comment, you heard that from a member of the public this morning. Continues to be lots of conversation, lots of contact for us to assist in some way. I again personally believe that there needs to be a lot more work done on that topic before we're ready to make an investment. So that would provide some professional expertise to assist.
And yeah, Maury, I know you've worked on this for months in conversations. Last year, I had Maury come speak with my Northeast mayors. We met. And, one of the areas they would like to work on is the housing area. And I've asked you about energy efficiency being expanded to home rehab, because that's where my mayors, we just have a lot of old housing, unfit housing, unsafe housing in the Northeast. And part of that too is unsafe because of, their water bills or in their water tank is so out of date. So yeah, I would like to have that category, as expanded. And I know this is beginning conversation. I would say in the workforce development, it was at a legislative committee meeting and just astounded that we're Kansas now is only like 50% are going to college in Kansas. When I graduated from college, it was 80% of Kansans were going to college. So it's a lot more in the construction trades now. And I've, connected with our Greater Kansas City Chamber with Tim and how we can in this connect with our high schoolers and junior high. I mean, that's in terms of workforce. That we really, I hope this money goes also to work with our school districts and be a partnership with our community college, which you have.
All right, let's continue to the next part.
Okay.
Ms. Hanslick.
Just very quickly, I wanted to say, as Commissioner Myers said, I really appreciate how you've set this up, Mr. Thompson, and I have a lot of questions, but those I'm sure will be answered in the future. And I did just have a question from staff, following up on Commissioner Fast's remarks. I'm trying to find it online, but I'm not finding what I want. But could we get some information on what sectors of the community are experiencing the most workforce shortages? Because we know not every sector is having the same issues. In fact, in some sectors, it's still very competitive. And I know that would help me to have some more information on, and if perhaps Siri could give us something even county level, that would
I
be
think our
great.
chamber should have that in.
Yeah, the chamber.
Right. Videoable, yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. O'Hara.
the Mental Health Crisis Center, are we thinking about that?
I do not have that included here.
Yeah, that's.
All right.
There
thank you.
needs to be a lot of planning, a lot more planning involved in that project than what we've done so far. Quite frankly, yeah.
There's two pieces on that. One is we know about how much Douglas County, who's about a fifth the size of us, between a fourth and a fifth the size of, we know the size and effort of theirs, but also the ongoing when it's 24/7 is significant. So speaking to the chairman, talking about there's a lot of study that needs to be done. It's just not the programmatic study. It's how would we pay for that? Because the ongoing is so significant when it's 24/7 operations.
Yeah, we're looking for partners, correct?
And we may be looking for a while.
Yeah. Douglas County, as I understand, had a spatial sales tax
Right.
that was approved to support the effort.
I
So,
believe they're using about $7 million a year in sales
Yeah.
tax, but
yeah.
All right,
So,
thank you.
Okay, next item. Go
Okay,
ahead.
Chairman, before we move to this last section, which is talking about what I've called one-time community investments as opposed to these that I call direct community investments. I think important to pause here and share a little bit about my thought process. We've got $117 million. We know using the lost revenue calculation, we can keep if you will, $85 million of that. That is 73% of these dollars. There could be strategies, I think, if we waited, that we keep even more. I personally question whether that's the right response for our community. I believe there are expectations from our community that some of these funds come back to them in direct ways. That's what I'm proposing with this $31 million, which equates to 27% of the total. I don't know if you happen to have seen Sedgwick County's plan that was released fairly recently. They were claiming all of theirs and using it, what got labeled, I'm not sure appropriately, but internally and not dispersing any to the community. Community did not respond well. I personally think we need to have a plan that shares some of this resource directly with the community. And with that, I will move to the 73% or the $85 million, again, that we can claim using the lost revenue calculation. We would then, like we did with the 22, which is a subset of the 85 we already claimed, we put that in the countywide support fund. Again, it's general fund reserves, but we've identified it for tracking and reporting purposes. Again, that's $85 million. So last slide. Walking through the proposed one-time community investments. The first item is a series of what I'm calling core operating grants, $150,000, which is $75,000 for each of the three entities there, would be $25,000 this year and another $25,000 next year. The Arts Council, Enterprise Center, and UCS. And you'll see the boxes out to the right-hand side around those categories. Those three organizations stepped up when we received our first CRF, a couple of years ago now, and have done a tremendous amount of work for us in administering grant programs and working through the planning process with us. Again, I'm proposing that we acknowledge that work with these one-time core operating grants. Heard Scott suggest that a couple of the items on the revisit list I would address here. Those are addressed partially here in these core operating grants. Second item is the ECJC match. They had made a request for some additional matching funds as part of the budget process. I'm proposing that those would be one-time use of funds through our $85 million in the countywide support fund. 3, the housing loan, that's the action that you already took. Sheriff's Office has identified about $1 million in direct costs due to testing and additional staffing directly tied to the pandemic that we would reimburse. The county square, Commissioner Ashcroft, one of your questions was opportunities to partner with our cities. I believe you're all aware of the proposal to do work out here on the square. This would be the county's contribution towards that work. The airport proposing $3 million in additional investment in our airport and $15 million to set aside in an economic development fund. And finally, $20 million for Evergreen Community of Johnson County to allow them and us to come to resolution on the ongoing needs for Evergreen Community of Johnson County to help them with the construction of a new facility and, quite frankly, to end the ongoing county contribution of funds to Evergreen in the future. So that totals about $41 million in proposed uses, leaving $44 million in unspecified uses for the board's direction and any other future uses that you would so choose. And with that, Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for additional questions.
Other questions? Ms. O'Hara?
Any specifics on Economic Development Fund?
My thinking there is, I think we're all aware of the potential of some significant economic development in the county. And I think it's probably prudent while we got this opportunity with the unknowns of what that could be and ramifications, implications, and potential ask of Johnson County government to set some funds aside at this time until we know more.
Oh, we can say no.
Absolutely.
Okay, airport investment.
I'll take that one, Scott.
Yeah, I need to be a little bit careful about this discussion, but we have an opportunity to secure property within the runway protection zone at New Century. And this would involve a land swap and
Oh.
us replacing a building.
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about. Thanks.
So we thought it would be good to use federal funds since we'd be replacing the building for.
This would involve KDOT. Yeah, okay. Mr. Ashcraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Thompson, I look at these and at this point, they are just numbers. And I am struggling with how we will be measuring success. But the one on the sheriff's office is a reimbursement. Is that? Okay.
Apology. Reimbursement to the sheriff's office
So
Reimbursement for what?
for their direct COVID-related expenses. They were doing some testing that they've got expenses that are allowable use. We would reimburse those and some associated staff time due to the testing and due to some overtime uses as a result of those issues around the pandemic.
it just, that doesn't seem to fit under the one-time community investment category. So just an observation. I'm not tracking with your thinking at this point. So I'm not there yet. I think I have an understanding on some of them. The Evergreen community issue, I'd like to know more. I know this has been an issue, but what I'm looking for is how, and maybe that's what you're suggesting with the 44 million, how that might be translated into direct tax relief. These, you could make an argument, would substitute, but that doesn't necessarily realize a tax savings for residents. But the 44, there may be some opportunity there. Is that what you're thinking?
Correct.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, and thank you for that comment. I meant to make that and forgot. Yes, that would be an argument that you are reducing reliance on ongoing tax support if you use these funds for that $41 million.
I think don't lose sight of the fact that there are expenditures, one-time expenditures in the future that we're going to have to make a decision about using local tax dollars. So if we can use some of this money to offset those expenses, that is a direct tax benefit to the taxpayers.
Thank you,
Keep
Chairman,
that in mind.
for that. And this is a partial list. I'm sure if we sat around, we could identify other one-time uses of funds. So this is not meant to be all inclusive. So you're exactly right.
You know, I don't know whether transportation
Meal site, meal.
facilities, I'll use that broad term, are included, but we have some road improvements that are in the process that are very expensive, i.e., is it Lackman? Yeah. So, you know, there are opportunities for one-time expenditures, which we're going to have to make with local tax dollars. And this may be an opportunity to offset benefit taxpayers.
Chairman, this is Penny, County Manager. I would just say that you may recall there is a long list in the CIP that were not funded. Some of them have been funded in the budget, some of them are covered here, and some of them still have yet to be funded in the coming years.
So, okay, other questions? All right, Ms. Fast.
Yeah, that's what I was, because like got the traffic control tower at the airport, the new, we haven't decided on the new meals site. I mean, could those be, what's the definition of one-time community investments?
Well, again, this 44 million that I'm showing left over, those would be truly totally flexible funds that you could use to do anything that government typically does.
Just
Questions,
could
Ms. O'Hara?
the expenditures of, I believe it's now like $500,000 for the Coleman plant. Can we go back and reimburse ourselves for that, or does it have to be new expenditures?
I don't know. My guess is probably not, but we can check on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
All right. Other questions, Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following up on your comment. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, but there's an endless list of work that could be done. There are many, many wants. What I'm suggesting is, how do we provide direct tax relief to taxpayers rather than funding of projects? As valuable as they may be, the taxpayers who are suffering now from the world we currently live in. I get those conversations constantly, and $44 million would cover an additional 1 mil reduction for the next 3 or 4 years. And that's something taxpayers could see and react to and know. So just a different perspective, Mr. Chairman.
I understand that, and, that certainly is a possibility, but if you reduce it today, then tomorrow you have to go right back up again. And so I think that's the offset. So anyway, okay. Well,
Chairman,
thank you.
If I may, my real-time fact checkers have caught me here, so let me stand corrected. Apparently I said they needed to be expended through the end of next year. I meant to say 24.
I
Oh,
thought it was
2024, okay.
But I
Oh.
didn't
Thank you.
correct you. Thank you.
Somebody else did. So.
And we all feel a lot better now, Maury.
So that means 2 years of CIPs that we could be looking at, 2023 and 2024. Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. And we'll go to the next phase. Robin.
Yes. Good afternoon. Robin Symes with the Budget Financial Planning Department. We'll move on to our our budget deliberation. First, I'm going to go over a few updated financial projections, and then we'll move on to the revisit list. So in February of 2023, we received the initial assessed valuation estimate from the appraiser that started out at 13.2 million. At that point, we assumed 178 million in appeals and also IRBs and TIFs. That brought us down to about 13 million or 9.5%. Initially, we assumed personal property would go down 5%, utility would go up 2%. And so that would bring us to a total assessed valuation of 9.24%. So we just recently, the last day or two, we received the new valuation. I apologize, I already have a typo. The real property assessed valuation in June actually is 13.1 million or 10.4%. And that number, I just want to clarify that all the appeals, the commercial and residential, have gone through the process. And so that includes all of the appeals to date. There may be some outliers that will come between now and the end of October. The 13.8 million, those are pending exemptions. So those have not gone through BOTA yet, but we know that those will be coming. And so we do factor those into our estimate so that we don't have too high of an assessed valuation since we know they're coming in. So when we take those out, that gets us to 10.3%. Personal property actually went down 11%, and then utility property went up 7.5%. So our revised total assessed valuation is 13.499 billion or 10.1%. So what that does as far as numbers,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Did you say that personal went down how much?
11%. And that's due to the machinery and equipment legislation that the board or that the state had done. And so over time, as companies get rid of their personal property, we lose that.
Thank you.
So what that does for our ad valorem tax revenue impact compared to what we had originally estimated for the county taxing district, that provides an additional 845,000 at the 17.744 mils. Park and recreation, it's 158,000. In library, it's 130,000. So that total change from February to June is about 1.1 million. Now, as far as that revenue goes, and we have another projection, our first proposal in looking at that, since those are, when you look at the whole total, those are minor numbers, it's like 0.3% of a change. And so knowing that we have personnel or labor market pressures and that we also have inflationary pressures, our proposal would be to go ahead and put those into countywide for those unforeseen expenses that will be coming down the pike. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So as far as sales tax, in our original 22 estimate, again, we're only looking at local Public Safety 1 and Public Safety 2, because Public Safety 3 and Stormwater are both dedicated. So our original 22 estimate was 79.4 million. That original estimate included a 2% increase in sales tax and a 4% increase in use tax. After the first 3 months in 2022, the average for those 3 months for sales tax has been 8% and use tax has been 16%. So knowing that the economic factors that we have coming, knowing that people are going to have to start paying student loans, interest rates are going up, housing prices are higher, your mortgage is going to be higher. We know that those that average probably will not sustain throughout the year. And so we have adjusted those down to 5% and 12%. We have received April and May state estimates as far as what they received overall for the whole state for sales and use tax. And those for April, sales tax was actually at about 4%, and in May it was 5%. So we're already seeing some decline in those sales taxes. And so knowing that we have still another 8 months and that there's still maybe some delayed impact, that's where we revised the 22 estimate to 5% and 12. So with that change for 2022, that gives us an additional 3.2 million. Again, those would fall to reserves and we'd be able to use that if those changes continue. And we could see a different change and it decline even more. For 23, the original estimate was 81.3 million. And we had our normal 2.2% and 4% growth. We're seeing use tax continue to go up, but we feel that in 23, and especially with the possible recession coming, that the sales and use tax will normalize, possibly reduce at some point. And so that will put us back to the 2% and 6% for a revised estimate. But for 23, what that does give us is an additional 3.8 million. However, I would caution, these are estimates. This is looking at 3 months of this year, and we still have 9 months to go. And so for flexibility, we would like to include these additional revenue estimates in the proposed budget and the maximum expenditure authority, but put those into countywide as a contingency, knowing that if these sales tax numbers do not come to fruition, that funding will not be spent. Looking here at the additional funding, what we talked about, labor market pressures, Maury has continually talked about that and how the amounts that we have in there may not be enough. We've heard from the sheriff and from others that continued pressure. I was recently at a luncheon and all of the cities are doing salary studies, 5% merit. And so we are going to continue to see that kind of pressure on our labor market. Inflationary pressures, obviously, interest rate just went up. We have CPI, just a lot of pressures on the economy. And so at this point, we feel, yes, these are revised estimates, but we think it's prudent to go ahead and put those in a contingency mode for now, because again, as you're going to see over the next few weeks, you'll see requests coming back from facilities. We're already seeing price increases. We know that debt service may increase as well due to those interest rates. So that would be our proposal at this point with that additional funding. So I'd like to stop here just to have that discussion first.
And I just wanted to add a couple things. I know Commissioner O'Hara has her hand up, but there's a number of things at play here. And we showed a graph of sales tax growth early in the budget process, and we had that change in trajectory. And so we originally had that change in trajectory over 12 months. Where it's going up faster, and then we went back to normal and talked about a paradigm shift. And so we're at a point where we've had 3 more months at that higher shift. The last 2 months of the state have shown less strong growth year over year. All those numbers Robin was talking was month over month of the prior year. And so we're starting to see it slow down at the state. And we also know that a recession may be coming. Now, historically, some recessions have not impacted Johnson County a whole lot. So you see that we went ahead and did traditional growth year over year, but what you're really seeing for the numbers for this year are strong growth in the first half of the year and tapering off, even maybe a little bit of a dip in the second year. So that's kind of how I look at those numbers. And the other thing I would add, Robin gave some good examples on inflation. You know, we've seen on agenda items that we've had we had one come in under the contingency where they built a bunch of padding in. I think it was a public works item last week, and it came in without as much inflation. But there's other areas that are fine until they're not. We just spent 25% more on buses, and we're lucky to get them. So what you see is that inflation can be in an area where it seemed fine, and then all of a sudden there's supply chain. So that's really what we're thinking with this contingency. And then on the employment side, that is something that we've talked a lot about, where Maury's kind of had HR, or we might have had somebody extra come in and do it. Color code map each, not department, but division, red, yellow, and green. And we've talked about where there's red, we need to do retention. We've also talked about, as we get partway into the yellow, maybe you start doing it then. So again, we just feel that inflation and employment are extremely volatile right now. And so that's why, even though this is a significant amount of money, we don't want to put it up for expenditure, but we want to put it up for capacity so that we can be agile. So I just wanted to add a little bit to context to our thinking and kind of how we got here, in terms of how we ran the projections, and also our thinking on our recommendation to put it in countywide.
Well, I think it's appropriate that we use the information that we have to make investments going forward. However, just in the last 2.5 months, I think a lot of ideas about the economy and where we're going have changed drastically to the negative side. So, but 3 months from now, it may be a completely different picture.
Right. And it's just, I think we're going to have a recession nationally. I'm not sure yet to what extent we're going to feel one in Johnson County, because I've been doing this long enough to remember some recessions that were not like the Great Recession, but were still considered recession nationally, where we kind of hummed along. I will tell you that the city of Leawood hummed along through the Great Recession. They had enough new projects going, and they stayed pretty solid through the Great Recession, as I recall. Maybe not tremendous valuation growth, but they did. It didn't hit them like it did us. Well, likewise, there's been some recessions that we felt, but not as much as the national economy. So that's where I kind of am. I think there's a downturn coming. I'm just not sure how much it's going to hit us. Our fundamentals are sometimes a little better than nationwide.
I think there have been a couple of big organizations in the past 20 plus years that have made a big difference in Johnson County. One of them was Sprint during the 90s, when they were growing so dynamically, hiring lots of people. And then also Cerner, which was a strongly growing company creating jobs. Both of those situations have changed to a great extent. So I'm not sure what the next big company is going to be. But and I also remember during the 08 and 09, that recession affected the housing market. And I think this one is going to also, with a much higher interest rates. So if we see a period of time where values are going down, unlike what we've experienced in the last several years, that's going to create a particular issue also.
Yeah, those were some fun budgets.
Okay. Ms. O'Hara.
Mr. Neufeld, if you have a crystal ball that you can see what this economy is actually going to do, you are in an elite number of people. And I think that the stock market has lost approximately 20% of its value. Gas is now nearly $5 a gallon. Consumers are most likely going to be hitting the brakes on spending. And with the housing market slowing down, and I don't know if that's going to be true in Johnson County or not, but that that means that all of the expenditures of home improvements and this, that, and the other, that those are going to be decelerating too. But I do have a question. What is our loan balance currently on the courthouse?
I'm sure that
I think we have, I think
have
we
that
sent that
handy?
out. Let me look. I have that. I think I emailed it to
I think you did.
yeah, I emailed it to the board. I can
Yeah.
pull that up or I can resend that.
Yeah, just,
Okay.
just when you pull that up, just let me know. And I know that it's possible that we could pay that off early. Of course, all these projections on sales taxes.
Yeah, and we are ahead of schedule on that. And, luckily we did those projects when we did them and they both came in
right,
on budget.
Right, before the
So-
huge inflationary pressures. Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for that update. Next,
Okay, next for the revisit list, we do have 4 items that were at the 3 or above mark, and that includes the Department of Health and Environment, a medical director, the mobile integrated healthcare telehealth platform at 42,500. And then also the medical director, the nurse practitioner, physician's assistant. United Community Services planning increase, which I think Maury addressed in his presentation, and then also the ECJC request, which Maury presented as well.
And I want to say, oh, he's already up. Joe Connor has put together a little bit of information to share with you because as you know, on the DHE request, there's some new concepts and there's 3 or 4 departments involved. And we had talked about, the need to look at how all that fits together across all those departments and what the best solution is.
Thanks. Thank you, Scott. Again, Joe Connor, Assistant County Manager. So the first 2 items are really kind of combined. So I'm going to talk about them both as kind of one item. The proposal is based on really providing direct health care to individuals who are utilizing our EMS services on a very frequent basis and can probably receive care at a more appropriate setting and in a lower cost manner. And so after the May 19th workshop, I got together with some of the key staff to talk about, what research is going to be required to fully understand who we're going to serve and how that service will be provided. There's a lot of different ways to try to provide that service for these folks. So I have held a series of items or series of meetings with Dr. Jacobson and his staff in his office with Paul Davis, Dr. Ariola, and Bill Nixon to discuss and come up with some recommendations. One of the things that we found immediately was that the item of the 42,500 for the integrated platform is not necessary. You'll see an item coming before you in a week or 2 from DHE. They're getting a new electronic health record system. And as part of that system, they'll be able to accommodate billing needs as well as telemedicine or telehealth. So that item won't be necessary. But the one thing I would say that there was consensus, amongst our group and the recommendation, and when we were talking with Penny about it, was to we want to continue to study this item and research what the possibilities are. There's a whole lot of partners that need to be engaged with this, fire departments and hospital systems and others, to figure out how we can be successful and try to make an impact on populations that really need it. And so at this time, we weren't recommending it to bring it forward to include in this year's budget, but look forward to a future report or future proposal that has a little bit more of these questions answered, and we can really start to figure out who are we trying to serve, or who's going to receive the most benefit, and how do we provide the most community benefit from this type of program. As Dr. Jacobson will, as he said, he'll continue to tell you, there's some communities around the country that are doing these kind of innovative things, but they're a lot further along than we are. We need to get our planning in together and get our research done and figure out what our program is going to look like.
questions, Mr. Myers?
Thank you, Chair. I know I'm one of the people that put this down as a revisit. And I've gone through a lot of thought process and talked to different people, and where I'm landing is that I really do see, just as Mr. Connor just said, there probably needs to be more review on this item and a better development plan so that we know that whatever we are choosing to do. When I first heard it presented, my eyes opened big and I saw, oh, I see the benefit. I see where there's need. I see, but we really don't have and haven't had the time to put together that development plan of how or what is going to be the best practice in utilizing this any funding for this particular, these two items. So I'm right on the same page of thinking that we need to have more review and develop a plan and hold off on this expenditure.
Okay, other comments? Ms. Hensley?
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Commissioner Myers that those first two items, it makes a lot more sense to take those off the table. And then what I'm hearing is the last two items are being discussed and covered in the SLFRF funding. So what I'm hearing is all of these items really don't need to be funded through the 2023 budget at this time.
Okay, other questions or discussion? Well, all right. So
I have a question.
Ms. O'Hara, I'm sorry.
Does this mean we get to go home early?
Pardon?
Yeah.
I think I see a consensus developing.
Well, that's good. That's good. That's where I'm at also. Even though I missed that meeting, I had a chance to visit with staff and I'm there also. So, okay, so in that case, these are the revisit items. So unless there's a motion, otherwise they have been resolved. And so what action do we need to take?
At this point, it would be direction to move forward with the county manager's proposed 2023 budget, and then including the additional revenue changes in countywide for contingency basis based on the economic.
Okay, and
factors.
this will reflect the maximum budget that we will consider next week. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Right,
Okay.
and we'll bring that together in a formal agenda item, which will then form the basis for our publication efforts and everything that goes with that, the revenue neutral, et cetera.
Okay, well, this is a committee of the whole, so we need a motion to recommend to the full commission. And that motion should state what, Robin?
That the commission proposes the maximum expenditure budget or maximum expenditure authority to include the county manager's proposed budget plus the budget department's revised revenue projections.
Okay, do I hear such a motion? Ms. Hensley?
So moved.
All right, is there? a
Second.
Myers seconded the motion. Further discussion? Mr. Ashcraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a procedural matter, I will support this. I have reservations about the budget construct, which I'm sure we will discuss after the public hearing.
Okay, well, again, the public hearing is in July,
Actually, it'll be August 22nd.
August 22nd. Okay. And the maximum, again, the maximum budget set next week will mean we cannot exceed, but we can reduce.
Correct.
Right.
And that's a
okay,
maximum by fund. So every fund will be locked
Right.
at a cap.
Okay. Ms. O'Hara?
Obviously, I have many questions about the budget, so I will not be supporting the maximum.
Okay. All right. Is there any further questions on the motion? All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Fast,
Aye.
Commissioner Myers,
Myers, aye.
Commissioner O'Hara,
No,
Commissioner Hanslick,
Hanslick, aye.
Commissioner Ashcraft,
Yes.
Commissioner Allenbrand,
Allenbrand, yes.
and Chairman Eilert.
Aye. I have 6 votes in favor, 1 vote opposed, so that will be the recommendation to the full commission. Mr. Thompson, do you have a comment?
I do, Chairman. I need to think about how to begin to advance components of this plan forward because we do need to proceed with due haste on getting these accomplished. So I will ponder that. I will share what I'm thinking. There may be some items that can be bundled together, for lack of a better word, and brought to you for action. But I'll think about how we need to do that, but we do need to get moving on this as well.
And one thing I will share is that Robin has put capacity in countywide in 22 and 23, but it may not match up with which year Maury thinks is most likely that we'll be expending these funds. So that's really what the three of us will work out. So there may be a proposed amendment to the budget item next week. So we'll keep you posted. It's just a timing piece is what we're working on.
Well, Mr. Thompson, maybe we can think about, if my math is right, what is the last meeting in June? Would that be the 31st?
The 30th,
30th? Pardon?
The 30th?
June
June
30th.
Okay. Perhaps when we're finished with our current budget deliberations, we can take that up at that meeting. I'm not sure what the agenda will look like. but
Yeah. Very good.
possible. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the weekend.
No meeting tomorrow, right?
There is no meeting tomorrow.